Hey Niagara, welcome back to another episode of Gorge Reviews. And in the previous episode, I introduced the topic of permaculture and promised we would spend the rest of the month on it. And I apologize. I spent the interim time trying to think through different ways that I could present this material that'd be like exciting and dynamic, and I didn't come up with one. It's huge, and there's many different facets to permaculture. Just really nailing down a solid definition that's kind of simple but captures it is hard. The best definition I did come up with, ironically, comes from Men's Journal. I don't even know when they published this article. There's no date on it. But I do think it's one of the better definitions available. So what I want to do is kind of go through the definition presented here, unpack it, and try and tie it into why it's important for us in Niagara Falls. Let's get into it. Permaculture is a design philosophy that focuses on designing human systems based on natural ecosystems. So it's not a design process. It's not just a philosophy. It's not a social philosophy. It's not a political philosophy. It's not a religious philosophy. It's not a personal philosophy. It's a design philosophy, meaning whatever you're designing and whatever the design process you're using, you can infuse the permaculture design philosophy into that. And I think it goes a step further, or I would go a step further and say that any problem-solving process that you're using to solve any type of problem, using permaculture design philosophy and infusing that into that process adds a lot of value. And it is about human systems, and it is based on natural ecosystems. And as we'll see as we go through the rest of this definition, why that is important to keep in mind, but I'm going to emphasize it now. What we have learned about ecosystems, frankly, what we've always known about ecosystems, is it's the most efficient way man has seen for use of material. If you leave any ecosystem alone and don't disrupt it, it sustains itself indefinitely. 1,000-year-old redwood forests, trees that live for hundreds of years without being fertilized. As long as a natural disaster or man doesn't come along and interrupt it, it sustains itself. And, what I've emphasized in January with introducing regenerative agriculture and all that's been discovered in the soil sciences in the last couple of decades certainly emphasizes this point, that we don't need to do as much as we're doing to improve our land. In fact, we're putting a whole lot of effort into things that are actually counterproductive in our land management practices specifically. But I think it applies broadly to a lot of things we do in life. And that's really what that sentence is telling us. So permaculture is based on the notion that we often take for granted where our food comes from, along with our water building materials. And in Niagara Falls, I think that's very, very true. Even water, it's abundantly obvious to, I think, everyone in this community that comes from the upper Niagara River. But where does that water come from? It comes from the Great Lakes. Where did that water come from? Oh, it came from glaciers a couple thousand years ago. No, that's how the Great Lakes may have been formed. But, they've done the research and they understand the number of years it takes to turn over each lake, meaning every drop of water in that lake will not be there in X number of years and will be replaced by new water. So Lake Superior, I think, takes the longest, and it's 200 plus years. What is it? 2022. So back when this country was founded, all the water was in Lake Superior at that time is no longer there. All the water that's there is newer than our country. So it's not from glaciers millennia ago. And so that means it's being replenished by rainwater, all right, and tributaries flowing into the lake, but those come from rainwater also, and that's part of the cycle. And so if we just totally disconnect ourselves and don't think through that in our minds, we're going to make unwise choices. And I think the last 2 centuries demonstrates a lot of the unwise choices mankind, even Americans, have made in managing their water resources. And so that's why I think it's important for us to understand permaculture and start thinking in the context of permaculture and start evaluating our own problems, coming up with our own solutions for our own problems in this community specifically, utilizing this design philosophy. Primarily, it's about a whole system thinking and transforming us from being dependent consumers to responsible producers. It's not saying that each individual needs to produce everything that they use. It's saying that whatever you produce, you should produce responsibly. Right? And you got to shift your focus from a consumer focus. What can I buy? What's the cheaper, most cost-effective product? What's the most cost-effective solution to my problem? Versus, how do I solve this problem without using a resource? Right? How do I fix a thing? How do I produce something for myself? How do I produce something responsible that adds value to the rest of my community, the rest of my society? It's a different way of thinking. It really is. I hope this is coming through already with just these first 2 sentences or 3 sentences. Because permaculture really boils down to meeting our goals, our individual goals, our community goals, our national goals, our goals as a species on this planet, using less energy. Less energy. On a macro level, we pretty much all have the same goals, according to this definition, and I absolutely agree with it. I find no critique, no argument against what they're saying, that we all pretty much have the same goals. And that's to play more, work less, right? To eat well, feel safe, and be loved. And what I also find interesting about this laying out of our common goals, it's very humanistic. In psychology, there's 2 schools of thought. You have the behaviorists and you have the humanists. All right, and the 2 schools of thought basically on human motivation. What motivates humans to do anything? On the behavior side, you got like B.F. Skinner and Pavlov, explaining rewards and punishments and conditioning. And yet that does a good job of explaining a lot of human behavior and a lot of human motivation, but it falls short in a lot of other areas. That theory has a boundary. And beyond that boundary, there are things it doesn't explain about humanity. It's based off of animal research, and it certainly works with the animals. I mean, they've come up with reward schedules, like equations that can say, I know how long it's going to take me to get a pigeon to solve this puzzle. And I want to go down the rabbit hole on behaviorism. The humanist school of thought, though, Maslow is probably the most widely known humanist, and his hierarchy needs probably, the most known piece of work from Maslow, because it's not the entirety of Maslow. Maslow is actually a personal hero. I did my master's thesis on applying Maslow in an industrial organizational setting. So yeah, I do have a big Maslow bias. But Maslow's hierarchy needs, that's encapsulated right here in this sentence, right? At the base of his hierarchy is meeting your physiological needs. That's the first thing humans want to do. All right, then Maslow postulates that if you've sufficiently met that, you're going to move on to your safety needs, which is like shelter and not being eaten by lions. If you sufficiently meet those needs, then you're going to go to love and belongingness. Making sure I got my order right. Love and belongingness, which is what we're saying, everyone wants to feel loved. After that, you're going to meet your ego needs, and then you move on to self-actualization, which is, the pentultimate in Maslow's hierarchy. We don't need to dig too deep into that, but it's just interesting that they've humanized this, what's taken for granted is very nature-oriented philosophy. But humans are part of nature. That's what I like. It's really bringing man back to nature. I hate this the separation we often do. We're all part of the same ecosystem. We're all part of the same system. And what we've learned from the soil sciences in the last couple of decades is how by industrializing our agricultural practices and human hubris driving us to solve problems that nature had already solved, and it's also ignorance. I mean, we kind of focused on how microbes affect us directly, and we weren't really focused that much on plants, except for when there was plant disease attacking our crops, and then we want to solve that problem, obviously, so we'll look at it. And that led us to, penicillin worked for killing microbes on us. let's just throw some pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides at our plants. But in so doing, we're killing a lot of beneficial organisms that the plants depended on to get their nutrients from the ground. Why isn't a redwood forest in need of fertilizer after sucking nutrients out of the same acreage for millennia? Right? Because the microbes in the soil break down rock and provide all the elements by breaking, because it's there, it's already in the soil. Until your roots hit China, right, there's enough stuff to support your plant life. As long as you have the microbiome natural to that area that's created a symbiotic relationship with the native plants in that area, you'll be fine. Kind of a tangent, because I really want us to focus on what permaculture is and how it is more than just focusing on plants. We constantly strive for high quality life. It's a theme that's very consistent across the social media forums in Niagara Falls. I've watched over the last 8 years. It comes up all the time. Quality of life, quality of life. Our quality of life is stagnant. Quality of life is disproving. We have a very low quality of life in our community. Why are we not making reasonable progress? Now I've come to a really solid conclusion. And I think permaculture is it. So I encourage you guys to go, there's just tons of information out there. You got to take it in bites, and it is complex. It is a philosophy. So you need to spend time on it. When permaculture say use less energy, they're saying it's individual physical energy, it's individual mental energy, it's individual financial energy. We need to use less. Now, when I say individual mental energy, I don't mean think less. I mean think more efficiently. Don't mean use less physical labor, just use your physical labor more efficiently. So if there's anything in this I would critique, I would say they should emphasize that. It's using energy efficiently, not just using less of it. It's not a minimalist philosophy, right? It's a growth philosophy. It's a improving quality of life philosophy, not a let's go back to the Stone Ages philosophy. Nothing about permaculture says don't use fossil fuels, right? It's not a principle. It's not a law. It's not even something. Use less. Don't use it when you don't need to. Conserve it. Don't waste it. That's at the core of this philosophy, and that's why it's based on natural ecosystems, because they're very efficient in the energy uses. Now, the last sentence, maybe that should have been up front. All right, the bottom line might have led it with that. At the same time, I think all these other sentences, you've already concluded what the last sentence says. Through these fundamental ideas, permaculture becomes a whole new lens that we begin to see the world through. It's true. I'm 51 years old, right? I've been intellectually curious all my life. I've done a lot of research and analysis on a broad range of topics in my lifetime. Somehow I miss permaculture, and it's been around since the 70s. Mankind's missing permaculture, right? Those who have locked onto the value, though, have made huge strides in reversing man-caused damage to land, all right, solved huge community problems, improved the quality of life of many, many humans. And I challenge you guys, go find me a place where permaculture was applied and there was a failure. Haven't found it yet, right? And because there's so few people immersing themselves in it, so few people infusing it into their problem-solving process and the design processes, it's not advancing as quickly as it should. And we as a species, we as communities, we as nations are not getting the value out of it. And ignoring it is at our own peril. Honestly, mathematically, this is very provable. When we look at Gabe Brown, that North Dakota farmer who went on the regenerative agriculture path a couple decades ago, what we can see now is he is using his own mental energy far more efficiently. He's using his own physical labor far more efficiently. And his financial energy is amazing. Right? He's not out yielding everyone in his county. He's above average yields on his land. Right? But everything he's yielding more profitably than anyone else. Because he's putting far less inputs into his land. Because he studied the ecology and he used the ecology to enhance his soil health. So he's not using fungicides. A lot of money saved. Not using herbicides. A lot of money saved. Not using artificial fertilizers. A lot of money saved. Plus all the time that he would have spent applying those inputs on his own property. And in the meantime, since he stopped doing that, his soil health is improving, right? It's getting better. The nutrient density of his crops is far higher than anyone's locality. So true, and he doesn't hide that fact that there are other people who are getting more bushels of corn per acre off of their land. What they aren't doing is producing more bushels of corn per acre with the same level of nutrient density. His corn's healthier. Whatever crop he produced on his land is healthier, demonstrably, measurably healthier. And he made more money selling it because he spent less money to produce it. You know, and when he lays, now I've seen some talks where he kind of lays out how much money he makes per hectare with different things. And inevitably, someone in the audience will always ask him, well, you know, if that crop is more profitable than everything else, why don't you do more of it? And he explains, because if I don't do these other things, right, which are profitable, but they're integral to the system, right? They feed the system. Removing that component from his ranch's system means he's going to have to, everything else starts to fail, or he's going to have to augment that with some other input, right? So yeah, he's giving up some acres for less profitable endeavors to make the overall system far more profitable, far more efficient, far more effective, right? And look at the number of problems he solved on his own ranch that is scalable to all of the planet, right? He's sequestering more carbon. He's providing more nutrient-rich foods. He's demanding less natural resources, right? By way of, he's not requiring anyone to produce any of these artificial inputs for him, right? Which means a lot of energy is not going into chemical production to feed his farm. The distribution of those materials to his farm, and then the dissemination, the spreading of those things around his farm, right? Which saves him a bunch of time. There's a lot of equipment he doesn't even have to own and maintain anymore because he doesn't have to do that. It's so much more efficient, right? And infusing permaculture design philosophy into your thinking is going to help you in your everyday life get there also. So I'm going to leave you with that, Niagara. In the upcoming days and weeks, we're going to delve into this topic a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. It's an elephant. We're going to eat it one bite at a time. I just need you to understand this is something worth your time to explore, worth your time to understand. And hopefully in this introduction and exploration of permaculture, we will collectively come to some conclusions on what we need to do next right here in our own community to apply it and start moving forward on a pace we haven't moved forward in since we industrialized our city in the 1880s, early 1900s. So get inspired, Niagara. We'll talk soon.